After finishing my master's degree, I returned to my alma mater and became a high school English teacher. One day, my former homeroom teacher handed me a blue envelope. "This was found in your workbook back before the college entrance exam," she said. It was a love letter, addressed to me. I brought the letter back to the office, laid my head on the desk, and fell asleep. When I woke again, I was sitting in a high school math class. Chapter 1. When I opened my eyes, I was back in high school, looking at the blackboard filled with letters and formulas. I couldn't tell if it was a math class or an English class. My brain completely froze, and all I could do was stare blankly at the teacher's shiny bald head. It took me a while to realize that this was a second-year math class and that I had gone from 25 years old back to 17. The teacher was passionately explaining at the front. The students were half asleep at their desks. Outside, the camphor trees were lush and green. Inside, the ceiling fans hummed lazily. Then I saw my homeroom teacher walking down the corridor. Suddenly, I remembered what had happened before I fell asleep. She had handed me that love letter, saying she found it in my workbook years ago. When she pulled it out, she accidentally spilled ink on the page, smudging the signature until it was unreadable. I didn't know who had written it. Someone, in a time I'd forgotten, had once liked me. To be honest, I wasn't pretty enough, nor tall enough. My only redeeming features were my fair skin and large eyes. But since I was slightly nearsighted, I wore round, black-framed glasses perched on my nose. Every time my parents argued, my mother would snap bitterly. "If it weren't for you, Ruby wouldn't look like a chibi cartoon character." She didn't inherit any of my sexy beauty, and that curly hair of hers? Straight from you. I would just hug my comic book, bite into an apple, and pretend not to hear. Better to stay out of the crossfire. The bell suddenly rang, dragging my thoughts back. The hallway came alive with noise. Students from other classes just finished gym, and a group of boys passed by carrying basketballs. My gaze drifted past the students walking around the classroom and landed on one figure outside, Mason. My childhood friend, the boy I had secretly liked for 7 years. His uniform jacket hung open, revealing a clean white t-shirt underneath. One hand was in his pocket, the other casually spinning a basketball. His bangs were damp with sweat. His jawline sharp and clear, he radiated the carefree energy unique to youth. While I stared absent-mindedly, he had already strolled to the last window, spun the basketball once, and caught it again with one hand. Then, he turned slightly and looked in my direction. Through the half-open window, he waved at me, then pulled a bottle of water from his oversized jacket pocket and tossed it perfectly toward me. "Ruby, your white peach soda water." Instinctively, I reached out and caught it. When I looked up again, he was gone. I lowered my head and stared at the cool bottle in my hand. I remembered, it was what I used to beg him to bring me after every gym class. But white peach soda water, I hadn't drunk that in years. Chapter 2. Mason and I had once been together. It happened after our first reunion following high school graduation, when I finally confessed my feelings to him. To be honest, I'd always been timid when it came to love. Mason, on the other hand, shone too brightly. There were so many girls who liked him that I couldn't count them on both hands. In that crowd, I had no chance of competing. I always felt out of place, but still, I wanted to try. I remember that night clearly. There were a lot of people at the gathering, even students from other classes. After silently drinking 3 glasses of alcohol, I got up and walked slowly toward the balcony, where Mason had been talking on the phone for a while. The night breeze was cool, and the moonlight was soft. Even now, after all these years, I can still remember how my heart raced and my palms sweated when I said, "Mason, I like you. I've liked you for a very, very long time." Our classmates, who had been playing games and singing inside, seemed to have gossip radar installed. They all turned their heads, and soon everyone had crowded around, cheering and teasing us. There was a green hourglass on the iron shelf covered with pot hose next to Mason. When the last grain of sand slipped through, he suddenly pulled me into his arms, leaned down, and whispered in my ear, "Then let's be together." I never knew what he was thinking during that 1 minute while the sand was falling. I just let myself drown in the joy of that moment. After starting college, we began a long-distance relationship that lasted 3 years. We fought often, and by the summer of our junior year, it was over. I remember it vividly. The day after we made up from one of our usual fights, he said, Ruby, let's break up. I never liked you. Later, I found out that the only reason he agreed to date me in the first place was because, just seconds before I confessed, he had been rejected by someone else. When that girl turned back to him again, I became disposable. Honestly, it hurt a lot. So I turned heartbreak into motivation, got into graduate school, and eventually became a respectable high school teacher. Suddenly, a dull pain spread across my cheek, and I heard my mother's voice beside me. Ruby, Mason from next door is already on his way to school. If you don't get up now, you'll be late. I shot up from bed, realizing I was back in high school again. I rushed to wash up, grabbed a slice of bread, and ran into the classroom just before the bell. Having to relearn high school subjects after so many years was brutal, especially for someone like me, whose grades had only ever been average. Math and physics were my worst nightmares. Flipping through the textbook made my head throb. I couldn't even solve a single problem anymore. When Mason came to find me, I was still wrestling with equations. By then, most of the students had already left, and the clock above the blackboard was nearing 11. From outside the window, Mason called again. Ruby, hurry up. I'm waiting at the school gate. It was Mason's mom who suggested that we walk home together after night study. She said it wasn't safe for a girl to go home alone at night. And back then, I was more than happy for any excuse to spend more time with him. As for Mason, because our families were close, he didn't refuse. I hurriedly packed my things and started down the stairs. But just as I turned the corner, the power went out, the hallway went pitch black, and I froze on the spot. In our third year together, Mason had once left me alone outside a theater late at night. While searching for him, I got accidentally locked in a dressing room. The power went out that night too, and I spent the entire night trapped in darkness. Ever since then, I'd been afraid of the dark. I even kept a lamp by my bed to sleep. My hand on the railing grew slick with sweat. Panic clawed at my chest until someone gently grasped my wrist. He guided my hand to rest on his forearm. In the darkness, his voice was low and steady. Don't be afraid, follow me. Chapter 3. Through the layer of his uniform sleeve, I could feel the firmness of the arm beneath, steady and strong, guiding me step by step down the stairs until we reached the final one. Then, the lights flickered back on. Instinctively, I raised a hand to shield my eyes from the sudden brightness. Peering through my fingers, I finally saw the boy standing in front of me. His features were clean and refined, handsome in a quiet way. Long lashes cast faint shadows beneath his eyes. His uniform zipper was pulled all the way up, neat and proper, so unlike Mason's casual, unruly style. If Mason was the blazing sun, then this boy was the reflection of the moon upon a still lake, gentle, distant, serene. His name was Benjamin, the undisputed top student in our grade, the kind of genius everyone called a scholar god. I hadn't interacted with him much. I only vaguely remembered seeing him a few times in the teacher's office. But the impression that stayed with me the most came from that same night I confessed to Mason. He had been there too. There were a lot of people at that party, and my attention had been completely on Mason. Still, I remembered catching a glimpse, out of the corner of my eye, of Benjamin sitting quietly in a corner, his head lowered, fingers wrapped loosely around a glass. Maybe it was because he always carried that natural sense of distance. No one really gathered around him, and few ever tried to start a conversation. Later, when I confessed to Mason, during that tense minute while he was thinking about how to respond, I looked anxiously around, and through the crowd, I caught sight of Benjamin again, still sitting in the same place. He was, perhaps, the only person there who hadn't joined the commotion. And when Mason finally pulled me into his arms, said let's be together, and led me back into the room, that corner was already empty, only the half-finished glass remained quietly on the table. No one noticed when he left. No one cared. Ruby, what are you staring at? Let's go. Mason's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. The next second, he grabbed my wrist and tugged me forward so suddenly that I almost twisted my ankle. Once I steadied myself, I turned back and waved to Benjamin. Thank you. On the way home, Mason asked how I ended up walking with Benjamin. I explained simply. The power suddenly went out, and I got scared. He helped me down the stairs. Mason glanced at me, frowning. Even if the lights went out, it couldn't have been that dark. Did you really need someone to hold your hand? Looking at the boy who always walked half a step ahead of me, I replied in a calm, almost casual tone, Mason, you probably don't know this, but I have a deep fear of the dark. Without any light, I get so scared that I can't even move. In high school, that pure, youthful age, boys like Mason, handsome, sunny, confident, with just a hint of mischief, were the kind every girl secretly adored. I didn't know why, but suddenly Benjamin came to mind. Compared to Mason, he seemed so much colder, so restrained. That night of my confession was probably the last time I ever saw him. In the 7 years that followed, our paths never crossed again. Occasionally, I'd hear his name mentioned by friends, always tied to some new award or honor he'd won. Someone as refined and distant as him, it was hard to imagine what he'd be like in love. But whoever his girlfriend was, she must be just as remarkable as he was. Resting my head against the bus window, I watched the neon lights flicker past outside and sighed softly. Then, turning toward the boy beside me, whose gaze had lingered on me the entire ride, I said quietly, Mason, you don't need to wait for me anymore. He blurted out, almost instinctively, why? Is it because I kept rushing you? Then next time No, I interrupted. It's just, I'm not used to it. Not used to being this close to you again. Chapter 4. Time flew by with the endless turning of test papers. My hard work wasn't in vain. I finally managed to catch up on first-year math and physics. But that was my limit. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't break past the level I'd once reached. I had originally planned to make a fresh start, to change my fate and get into one of the top universities like Tsinghua or Peking University. But the truth was, even with a second chance, my IQ hadn't magically increased. To get better scores, I still had to put in the same grueling effort. There were 25 classes in our entire grade. Based on ranking, I was in class 11, Mason was in class 7, and Benjamin, in class 1. For a long time, I didn't see Benjamin again. Our classes were too far apart. Our paths almost never crossed. The only thing we shared was the same English teacher. Then one day, during an English reading class about a car accident, I suddenly remembered something from the other timeline. Around this time, probably these very days, our teacher would mention how Benjamin from class 1 had been hit by a car outside Yusai bookstore while saving a child. He'd ended up hospitalized and missed an important competition. My fingertips brushed against the small flashlight in my drawer, pink, shaped like a fluffy cloud. After the blackout that night, I'd gone to the supermarket the next morning to buy it. But when I entered the classroom, I found one already sitting on my desk. Next to it was a small sticky note with just a few simple words. Use this next time the power goes out. I'd thought about it over and over. I wanted to prevent the tragedy from happening, but telling him not to go, telling him he'd be in an accident, would sound insane. So I decided I'd just get there first and save the child myself. That weekend, I arrived early outside Yusai bookstore. I planned to stop the child before anything could happen, solve it at the source, and everyone would be safe. Holding a cup of milk tea, I crouched by the roadside, scanning for any children running around, while also keeping an eye out for Benjamin. Then, a familiar voice came from above me. Ruby, what are you doing crouched there? Mason was looking down at me from the curb. Oh, I'm waiting for someone, I said, glancing up before turning my eyes back to the street. You said you couldn't come to Jonathan's birthday, and this is where you ended up? Jonathan was one of Mason's close friends. I'd never been that close with them, honestly. Back then, when I'd forced myself to hang out with his group just to be near him, it had always been exhausting. And what about you? I asked, squinting against the light. Didn't you say you were going? He didn't answer right away. After a moment, he reached down and pulled me up, leading me into the nearby milk tea shop. We sat across from each other in silence for a while before he finally spoke. Ruby, what's going on with you lately? There was confusion in his eyes, mixed with something like frustration. Something he couldn't name. Nothing, I said. Honestly, I've just been busy studying, busy doing problem sets, and busy no longer chasing after him like I used to. He let out a short, humorless laugh, his long fingers crumpling a napkin on the table. You used to come to me every day with questions. Every weekend you'd come over to my house to do homework, or drag me to the library. Ruby, have you noticed we haven't seen each other for 2 weeks? I froze for a second. Those habits had all belonged to the old me, the one desperate to stay close to him. But looking back, I realized he'd always been impatient when I asked for help. Most of the time, he'd just toss me his notebook and tell me to figure it out myself. A car horn blared outside, snapping me out of my thoughts. I smiled lightly. I just didn't want to bother you anymore. He looked like he wanted to say something else. But in that instant, I caught sight of Benjamin outside the window. Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and bolted out the door. The moment I stepped out of the milk tea shop, I quickly scanned my surroundings. Perfect, the only child nearby was safely held in a parent's arms. Relieved, I called out, "Benjamin," and started walking toward him. But before I could reach him, a motorcycle came speeding out of a narrow alley. By the time I reacted, I had already grabbed Benjamin and thrown us both out of the way. Two voices echoed at once, one from behind, one beside me. "Ruby! Ruby!" Chapter 5. I wasn't seriously hurt, just twisted my ankle from pushing too hard. The doctor said I'd need to stay in the hospital for a while to recover. When I heard both of them shouting my name, I got so scared that I thought I had been hit by the motorcycle. But as the crowd of onlookers gathered around, I pointed at my ankle and said, half jokingly, "Don't worry, I'm not dying. I'll call the ambulance myself." Okay. Once I was settled into a hospital bed, Mason stood beside me, face dark with anger. "Ruby, what were you thinking? Trying to be a hero? That was a motorcycle. What if it had hit you? Do you think?" "Mason." I cut him off. He looked so much like the version of him I remembered from our past arguments, angry, impatient, loud. Maybe he really did care about me, but he never knew how to talk calmly. Whenever he raised his voice, I couldn't help feeling scared. "I know what I'm doing." He gave a short, mocking laugh. I knew that sound. It meant he was furious. Sure enough, a second later, he spat out, "I'm done with you," and slammed the door behind him. I was used to it. Then a voice came from beside me. "Does your ankle hurt a lot?" A tissue appeared in front of my face. Benjamin had crouched down beside the bed, one knee bent, looking up at me with those calm, serious eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Only then did I realize I was crying. I didn't even know why, maybe the leftover tension from arguing with Mason. I took the tissue from Benjamin's hand and wiped my tears messily, forcing a small laugh. "It's okay. It doesn't hurt much. I'm just upset. My grades are going to drop again. You know, the kind of math where if you look away to pick up an eraser, suddenly nothing makes sense anymore. I don't even know how long it'll take me to catch up this time." After sighing pitifully, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, the room was crowded with people, and for a moment, I couldn't even speak. My parents were there, Mason's parents, and Benjamin's parents, all standing around my bed. After a round of worried questions and awkward thank yous, everyone finally left. It was my first time meeting Benjamin's parents, and unlike his quiet, distant demeanor, they were warm and friendly. The next day, as I was forcing down another bowl of my mom's miracle healing soup, Benjamin walked in, carrying my math and physics materials. Honestly, who in their right mind would turn down free tutoring from the top student in the entire grade? I practically wanted to bow in gratitude. And so began our half-month of one-on-one tutoring. Every day at noon and in the evening, he would come to my room to help me study for 2 hours. Sometimes, when I was working through problems, he'd also take a moment to help the little elementary school kid sharing my ward with his homework. So, our hospital room often sounded like this. "Mr. Jean, I'm done." "Brother Jean, I finished mine too." Every time those words came, Benjamin Jean would sigh helplessly, pull 2 orange candies from his pocket, and hand one to each of us. The kid would immediately unwrap it, pop it into his mouth, and beam. "Thank you, Brother Jean." I couldn't help laughing, and, imitating the kid's tone, I bit into my candy and said playfully, "Thank you, Brother Jean." The words had barely left my mouth when I saw Mason standing at the doorway, a bag of fruit in his hand, and a look on his face I couldn't quite read. Chapter 6. After being discharged from the hospital, not only did my grades not drop, they skyrocketed. It felt as if Benjamin had somehow unlocked the hidden circuits in my brain. Everything suddenly made sense. The following lessons became noticeably easier. When the final exams ended and I got my report card, I almost cried holding it. My math and physics scores were the highest I'd ever achieved. That evening, I ran into Benjamin at the school gate. I immediately pulled the paper from my bag and waved it in front of him. Of course, compared to his perfect scores, mine were nothing spectacular, but for me, this was a personal record. He gave a faint smile, pointing to my perfect score in English. "Your English is excellent," he said. I blinked, then gave a few awkward laughs. A moment later, he reached into his backpack and handed me 2 new workbooks. "These are more suitable for you. You can use them during the winter break." I took them without hesitation. Looking up at him slightly, "I heard you were preparing for the physics competition," I said. "How did it go?" Last time, he had missed it because of the accident, but this time, I'd prevented that. Surely he'd made it. He replied calmly. "I didn't win anything." My heart sank. "Oh, come on," I said quickly. "It must have been the questions. They were probably awful." It wasn't until later that I learned the truth. He hadn't gone to the competition at all. That day had been the day I was discharged from the hospital. He'd once promised to take me to the planetarium when I got out, and he kept that promise. That night, I saw the most beautiful, one-of-a-kind moon I'd ever seen. During the entire winter break, I was completely absorbed in studying. I worked through the 2 practice books Benjamin had given me, over and over, until my mom started to worry. She even asked cautiously if something had happened to me, and then tried to cheer me up by buying the full set of comic books I'd always wanted as a kid. Mason came to see me twice. The first time was right after the break started. He suggested we go study at the library together. I turned him down as gently as I could. The second time was on New Year's Eve. He knocked on my door and handed me a movie ticket, a new comedy that had just premiered. I stared at the ticket for a long moment before nodding. Sitting in the theater with popcorn in my arms, a strange sadness washed over me. Mason probably didn't know that. In another timeline, we had also watched this movie together. Only that time, I had been the one who bought the tickets and dragged him along. I tossed a piece of popcorn into my mouth. It tasted like cardboard. The familiar scenes on the big screen blurred together. And just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Benjamin. "Happy New Year." I typed back quickly. "Happy New Year." After the movie, Mason bought me a steaming cup of milk tea. I didn't refuse. I pressed my cold hands against it gratefully. We walked quietly down the bustling street, surrounded by laughter and fireworks. Children waved sparklers in the distance, their laughter echoing in the night. Mason watched them for a moment, then looked down at me. "Do you remember?" he said. "When we were kids, you'd always prepare sparklers before New Year's Eve, just waiting for me to come downstairs and play with you?" I smiled into my cup. "Of course I remember. You never wanted to play. You said sparklers were for girls." "Oh, and remember that one year I bought a cheap pack? One of them exploded and left a scar on my wrist." Fireworks burst in the air above us. Children laughed and shouted nearby. Mason was silent for a moment, then leaned down slightly, his tone unreadable. "Ruby, if that night I hadn't gone to wait for you at the school gate, but had gone downstairs to play with you instead, would you have never met Benjamin?" Chapter 7. I had wondered about that question too, long ago, but eventually, I realized there was no real answer. If I were the original Ruby from this timeline, even during a blackout, I wouldn't have been afraid. But I'm not her. I'm the Ruby from another world, and my fear of the dark came from the Mason of that other timeline. As for Benjamin, I held the little cloud-shaped flashlight in my hand and thought for a long time. What I couldn't figure out was, why him? Why was he the one who happened to appear at that exact place and time? I remembered that night we met, how he looked at me, as if he'd practiced it 1,000 times in his mind, and said, "Hi, my name is Benjamin." I looked up at him and smiled. "I know you. You're the Benjamin, the number 1 in our entire grade. Who doesn't know you?" He lowered his eyes slightly, the corner of his lips curving faintly. "Is that so?" Maybe it was. After winter break, Mason's class got a transfer student, a girl named Carolina, who became his new desk mate. From the very first day she arrived, the rumor spread like wildfire. "There's a super pretty girl in class 7. According to the gossip, Carolina was slim, had waist-length hair, bold eyebrows, bright eyes, and had learned dance since childhood. She was not only beautiful, but elegant and graceful. For weeks, the corridor outside Class 7 was packed with students during every break. They'd pretend to pass by, making up excuses just to catch a glimpse of her. I never went there on purpose, but one day, when a teacher called me to the office, I passed that hallway and, through the half-open classroom window, I saw Mason. He was leaning over Carolina's desk, explaining something to her. His expression was gentle and patient, something I'd never seen from him when he tutored me. The name Carolina wasn't unfamiliar to me, even though we had never met in my previous life. I remembered her clearly. She was the girl who had rejected Mason's confession and later regretted it. A year after Mason and I broke up, I went with my senior to pick up her wedding dress, and there, I ran into Jonathan and his fiancée. From him, I learned what had happened between Mason and Carolina. After the college entrance exams, Carolina had chosen to major in theater. Her university was several provinces away from Mason's. Her parents, who had been living apart for years because of work, had both cheated on each other. Their broken marriage had left a shadow in her heart. That was why she'd turned Mason down. She didn't believe in long-distance love. Or maybe, she just didn't believe in Mason. But eventually, she regretted it. Watching the two of them now, heads close together, sharing a laugh, I suddenly remembered something small. Something long buried. One winter, I'd taken a 4-hour high-speed train through the snow just to surprise him on his birthday. That day, I sat with him in the back corner of his classroom, listening to a lecture while I rested my head on the desk. Half asleep, he'd hidden behind a book and stolen a kiss. I guess there was a moment, however brief, when he really did like me. But later, he also lied to me. On our anniversary, he had taken me to see a theater play, Carolina's performance. And for her, he had left me alone in that dark theater, with the sunset spilling across the hallway floor. I walked quietly past Class 7. There was a Carolina's distance between us. He didn't see me, and I didn't call out to him. Sometimes silence is the only way to say goodbye. Chapter 8. The first time I went to Benjamin's class was after the midterm exams. It was a Saturday morning, and I brought my test paper to ask him about a few questions. The morning sunlight poured into the classroom, casting a sacred glow over everything. There weren't many people around. Halfway through his explanation of my mistakes, someone called him away, and he said he'd be right back. At first, I just held my pen and tried to work through the problems he had explained halfway. But gradually, I started to feel something was off. More and more people were gathering around me. At some point, I realized I was surrounded, like a monkey in a zoo enclosure being watched from all sides. They were staring curiously at me and my test paper, enthusiastically trying to teach me how to solve the questions. Someone even poked my hair and asked if I'd been scolded for getting a perm. So when Benjamin came back, that was the scene he saw. I was trapped in the middle, gripping my pen nervously, not knowing whose advice to follow. Sure, I might have the soul of a 25-year-old English teacher inside me, but the problem was I was short, and all the boys around me were tall. I was completely outmatched in presence. Voices rose and fell around me. I think it should be solved like this. My method's simpler. If you reverse the logic, it'll go faster. In truth, I didn't understand a single word they were saying. I just listened quietly. Ugh. How can you not get something this easy? Why do you look like a comic book character? So when I heard a familiar Ruby from the doorway, it was like seeing a savior. That was the first time I saw Benjamin with a cold expression. Calmly, he asked the crowd around me, "Have you seen enough?" And just like that, he rescued me from the chaos. Later, when we finished going over the questions and left, Benjamin paused beside a boy wearing half-rimmed glasses who was working on a physics competition problem. He glanced down at the paper and said, "Wrong. How can you not get something this easy?" The boy immediately snapped. "Damn it, Benjamin. Seriously?" On the way back, Benjamin suddenly turned to me and apologized. "I shouldn't have left you alone in the classroom. I'm sorry. I won't do that again." I blinked, realizing what he meant, then awkwardly smiled. "It's fine. Really, just a little embarrassing. And maybe a tiny bit of inferiority crept in." It was the first time I realized how big the gap between us was, like we were people from two completely different worlds. After all, I'd been through something similar before. Back when I used to follow Mason around, his friends often joked at my expense. How can you not get such an easy problem? Are you Mason's little tail? You follow him everywhere. Ruby, next time you come watch us play basketball, bring us water too. Doesn't matter if it's 1 bottle or 10, same thing, right? The gap between you and Mason's too big. You shouldn't call it childhood sweethearts, it's more like childhood neighbors. And what did Mason do back then? Oh, he laughed along with them. Suddenly, a warm cup of milk was shoved into my hands. He asked, embarrassed about what? I didn't know when he'd bought it. I took a sip and sighed. You don't get it. When a bad student stands next to a top student, there's this natural inferiority. He looked back at me, then stopped walking, puzzled. I looked up at him. He lifted his hand halfway, then dropped it, and instead pulled a tissue from his pocket. There's milk on your lip, he said. Huh? Is there still some? I licked the corner of my mouth instinctively and asked. He froze for a second, turned his face away stiffly, and muttered, no, it's gone. After a brief silence, his voice came again, softer this time. Everyone's good at something different. You're great at English, maybe one day you'll become an amazing English teacher. Chapter 9. A little over a month before the college entrance exams, I met Carolina face-to-face for the first time. That day, it was pouring. I had just bought a cup of hot milk from a convenience store, and when I came out, I saw her walking alone in the rain. If I remembered correctly, this must have been the day she found out that both her parents were cheating on each other. I withdrew my gaze and opened my umbrella, but before I could even steady it, someone snatched it away. Mason held my umbrella and turned back to say, let me borrow this for a bit. You wait inside. I watched him run toward her without hesitation, and a wave of frustration and hurt rose so sharply in my chest that I could barely keep it down. Soon, he brought the soaked Carolina into the convenience store and got her a cup of hot water. I sat quietly on the side, watching her cry, listening to Mason comforting her, without saying a single word. Carolina was indeed beautiful, even when crying. She had that pitiful beauty in tears look that made people's hearts soften. After finishing my milk, I picked up my bag and umbrella, ready to leave. But Mason stopped me. He said, she's drenched and might catch a cold. I'll walk her home first. Wait for me a bit. I'll be back soon. Even though anyone would have thought it heartless to refuse at a time like that, I still did. Unfortunately, during our tug-of-war over the umbrella, we broke it. It was a total lose-lose situation. I actually laughed in anger, looking at his stunned face. I asked calmly, happy now? Then I dramatically grabbed my bag and ran out into the rain. The next day, I, of course, caught a cold. The serious consequence of this whole incident was that Benjamin, who had always ranked first in every exam, fell to second place in the last mock test before the college entrance exam, because he missed the English test. The mock exams lasted for 2 days, and I had been forcing myself to attend despite being sick, barely holding on until the English exam. That noon, my parents weren't home. After lunch, I washed my face with cold water, trying to stay awake for the final test. But as soon as I got off the bus at the school gate, my legs gave out, and I collapsed. The last thing I heard before blacking out was Benjamin's voice. When I woke up again, it was 5 in the afternoon, and I was in the hospital. Benjamin was standing beside my bed, quietly speaking with the doctor. Even if I had been the most oblivious person in the world, I would have known he didn't take the English exam. I turned my head, and a flood of emotions welled up inside me. After 2 days of 4 drips, I returned to school, only to hear the first piece of news: Benjamin had fallen to second place. Seeing that glaring 0 in the English column on the grade sheet, guilt nearly swallowed me whole. I immediately ran to apologize to him. If it weren't for me, this wouldn't have happened. There were only 2 people in class 1 at that time, Benjamin, and that same boy with half-rimmed glasses, the one who'd mocked me before and was later mocked back by Benjamin. He had always been the eternal second place. But this time, he finally became first. Upon hearing me, he grinned and said, you know, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have finally gotten this top spot. Good thing I still managed to take the test even with a broken arm. As he spoke, he patted his left arm, which was in a cast. I felt even guiltier. Benjamin, still expressionless, said, "It's fine, the patient's more important." But before he could finish, that boy interrupted, laughing. "Hey, little Curly, I really owe you one this time. Ha ha ha." Before I could react, Benjamin's book flew through the air and hit him squarely, perfectly aimed. Then Benjamin grabbed my hand and led me away, as the boy's miserable howl echoed behind us. "Damn it, Benjamin, didn't you just say the patient's more important?" Chapter 10. Time was like a gust of wind, sweeping through our 18-year-old selves. By the end of the college entrance exams, I still hadn't found that love letter in any of the exercise books. I couldn't help but wonder if my presence here had caused a butterfly effect. Just like before, that very night after the exams, my parents took me out to celebrate. My dad patted my head and said, "It's over now. Don't worry about the results. We just want you to be happy." Mason and his parents joined us as well. The four adults chatted away enthusiastically at the table, while I felt stifled and excused myself to get an ice cream cone. Soon enough, Mason followed me out. It was the first time we had seen each other since the day we broke the umbrella. You see, if neither person takes the initiative, even the smallest distance can become impossible to cross. And back then, I was always the one who reached out first. The summer night breeze was cool. Mason followed behind me for quite a while. I knew what he wanted to say, so I stopped under a street lamp and waited. After a long silence, he finally said only one sentence. "I'm sorry." Her family was falling apart, and it was so close to the exams. We were classmates. I didn't want to see her lose focus and mess up her future. I looked at the tall boy before me, still handsome as ever, but somehow, he suddenly felt like a stranger. I sighed softly and asked, "Just classmates?" "What?" He frowned, confused. I smiled faintly, not bothering to explain. After a long pause, he let out a self-mocking laugh. "Ruby, are you never going to forgive me?" In another timeline, he and Carolina didn't end up together either. They dated for only half a year before breaking up because their personalities clashed. When I was in my second year of grad school, Mason came to see me once. I didn't know what he wanted, nor did I care to find out. That night, after a reunion with classmates, he stopped me at the campus gate. Under the thick night sky, he asked the same question again. "Ruby, are you never going to forgive me?" Snapping back to the present, I looked up at him and said quietly, "Mason, I wish you all the best in your future." When I got home, I opened my diary and began recording everything that had happened that day. The latter half of the diary contained entries written since I arrived here, while the first half was filled with words from the me who had lived here before. After writing the final word, a memory suddenly surfaced, that evening when the sky burned with fiery clouds. When the boy with half-rimmed glasses had said the patient's more important, I clearly remembered Benjamin's calm voice as he walked away. It was never the patient that mattered. My heartbeat quickened. I picked up the pen again and, pressing down the trembling of my hand, wrote 3 small letters on the last page of my diary. Benjamin. A gust of wind blew through the window, scattering the neatly stacked papers on my desk. I hurried to close the window and gather them, but as I bent down, something familiar caught my eye. On the 765th day since I had returned here, I saw that blue love letter again. It wasn't smudged with ink, nor had it disappeared because of my interference. It lay there quietly, tucked among the stack of exam papers Benjamin had once gone through with me. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, heart racing, but before I could open it, my vision began to blur. The world around me dissolved into haze and light, and through the swirling fog, I could only see Benjamin drifting farther and farther away. Chapter 11. When I woke up, I was in my office. My phone kept vibrating on the desk, and in my hand, I was still clutching that love letter, the one whose signature I could never make out. I sat there in a daze for a long time before picking up my phone. The message was from the school's work group. They were organizing an alumni reunion. First-year students would attend in person, while the second and third years would watch the recording later. I numbly typed received and sent it, then raised a trembling hand to cover my eyes, trying to suppress the ache and emptiness in my chest. When I got home, I dug out the diary I'd written during high school. Every line, every page, all of it was about Mason, from beginning to end. Not once did the name Benjamin appear, Only in the graduation photo did I see him, dressed in the same school uniform as everyone else, standing quietly among the crowd. 18-year-old Benjamin, clear-eyed and bright. So, in that world, he and I had never really crossed paths. Since that realization, every night I found myself lying awake, my heart aching. Whenever I closed my eyes, all I could see was Benjamin, walking beside me, smiling faintly, his voice echoing in my mind. This went on until the day of the alumni reunion, when I saw Benjamin again, now 25 years old. If 18-year-old Benjamin had been like the moon reflected in water, close enough to make you think you could touch it, then 25-year-old Benjamin was the moon in the sky, entirely untouchable. That day, I was leading my students into the auditorium, arranging them in an orderly line. Suddenly, I realized I had left my attendance book in the office. After giving a few quick instructions, I hurried back to fetch it. It was class time, so most people were either in the auditorium or in classrooms. The campus was quiet. I rushed up the stairs and missed a step. A startled cry escaped me, and in the next moment, an arm slid behind my back, steadying me before I fell. A clear, composed voice spoke close to my ear. Careful. When I turned around to thank him, the words caught in my throat. My heart stopped. Benjamin. He was wearing a sleek black suit, the top button of his shirt undone, revealing a glimpse of calm confidence beneath the formality. His features were more refined, more mature. The sharpness of youth had been tempered by time into quiet strength. Your ankle's swollen, isn't it? I'll take you to the infirmary. The long hem of my skirt covered my ankle, so I wasn't even sure. I shook my head quickly. I can go myself. You should get back to the auditorium. Judging from his attire, he must have been one of the returning alumni speakers. He glanced at his watch, then, without another word, bent down and lifted me into his arms. This is faster. You'll get your ankle checked, and I'll still make it back in time. I stayed silent in his arms, too stunned to speak, as he carried me into the school infirmary. Inside, we ran into the former discipline director, who was having his hand bandaged. When he looked up and saw us, he chuckled warmly. Well, what a coincidence. Benja and Ruby, you two were in the same year, weren't you? He turned to me and added, Benjamin from class 1, you remember, right? The one who was always first in everything. I nodded awkwardly. Then he looked at Benjamin. Aw, you probably don't know her. Ruby was from class 11, her grades were average back then, but she turned out great, came back as an English teacher now, and I must say, I lowered my head, pretending to focus on the doctor as he rubbed medicated wine onto my ankle, while the discipline director went on and on with his commentary, until Benjamin spoke, his voice calm but firm. Ruby from class 11, I remember. Chapter 12. By the time my ankle had healed enough for me to walk properly, the alumni reunion had long ended. The sunset stretched across the horizon as I limped out of the infirmary, only to run into one of my students, Tom. He tossed his basketball to a friend, jogged toward me, and grinned. MS. Ruby, let me help you back. For a brief second, I saw a shadow of 18-year-old Benjamin in him, and my heart trembled slightly. I nodded, thinking of my earlier encounter that day. I sighed to myself, why was every first meeting between us always so embarrassing? At the time, I thought it had been a coincidence, a fleeting moment that would never happen again. But at the parent-teacher meeting after the midterm exams, I saw him once more. Benjamin, Tom's cousin. Surprised? There were only the two of us left in the classroom. He looked up from his seat, his eyes calm and composed. After a pause, I managed to reply, not really. Looking closely, Tom did resemble him in his eyebrows. His face shape, though. Tom's English is a bit weak, I said, slipping back into my teacher's tone. Out of a 150-point exam, he got 15. That's quite something. Benjamin gave a faint hum in response, his gaze flicking briefly to my ankle. Does it still hurt? I shook my head instinctively. Then he stood, his voice gentle. I'll keep an eye on Tom's studies, but at school, I'll have to trouble. MS. Ruby. At first, I didn't quite understand what he meant. Not until Tom started showing up after evening classes every day. asking me hundreds of questions, sometimes even repeating the same one over and over. When I reminded him, he'd scratch his head and laugh sheepishly. Oh, really? I forgot again. Guess I still don't get it. Haha. MS. Ruby, you went to the same high school as my cousin, right? Were you too close? He's always been this quiet and cold. Huh? Bet no girl ever liked him like that. He'd keep talking. And somehow, the topic always circled back to Benjamin. So within a single month, every night I was forced to relive memories of the Benjamin I once knew, until I couldn't stop thinking about him anymore. One Saturday afternoon, after picking up some materials from a bookstore, I was about to call a cab when I heard Tom's voice. MS. Ruby. MS. Ruby. I turned and saw him waving enthusiastically, backpack slung over one shoulder. Standing behind him, car keys in hand, was Benjamin. 10 minutes later, I found myself in the passenger seat of Benjamin's car. Tom, holding a thick stack of worksheets, groaned miserably. MS. Ruby, I don't get any of this stuff. Can I video call you later for help? I thought back to the days when Benjamin used to tutor me in physics and math. My heart softened, and I nodded. The moment I agreed, Tom grinned, tossed the worksheets aside, and pulled out his handheld game console. I was speechless. From then on, my nights changed from being haunted by memories of Benjamin to seeing him in real time. Every evening, half an hour on the dot, just like tonight on the video call, Tom sat hunched over his homework, while behind him, half visible in the frame, was Benjamin, seated at his computer, his face out of view. I lowered my eyes and continued lesson planning. Over time, I grew used to these nightly calls, even started to look forward to them, to seeing him, until one night, 2 weeks later, I had just finished explaining a question to Tom when, suddenly, a girl in pink pajamas appeared in the video. She smiled sweetly, leaned against Benjamin, and called him softly, Ben. My mind went blank. Before I realized it, I had already ended the call. Chapter 13. For several days in a row, I turned down Tom's video calls, using the excuse that my throat hurt. But that soft, intimate Ben still echoed endlessly in my mind. I should have known better. Of course he would have a girlfriend. The next time I saw him was the evening my friend returned to the country. I had been dragged to a dinner party, and after drinking a bit too much, I went to the restroom. When I came out, I saw him walking with a group of people. The girl walking closest to him was beautiful. She was the same girl who had appeared briefly on the other end of the video that night. Flawless makeup, long wavy hair cascading down to her waist, and a red dress that flowed to her ankles. Under the dim restaurant lights, Benjamin lowered his head slightly, listening intently as she spoke animatedly, her gestures graceful and confident. My chest tightened, and I froze in place. So that's the kind of girl he likes. When I returned to the private room, I took the glass of water my friend handed me and sat quietly in the corner. Dazed, a bitter ache spread from my heart, pressing tears to the corners of my eyes. Amid the laughter and noise around me, I suddenly missed the 18-year-old Benjamin terribly. I hadn't even gotten the chance to say goodbye properly. When the dinner ended, I was the last to leave. I stood by the door for a long time, letting the cold wind sober me up a little. Then I looked up and froze again. Through the hazy night, Benjamin was walking toward me, one step at a time. He wore a long black coat, tall and steady, his features clear and familiar, just like that boy from years ago, walking toward me in his school uniform, sunlight outlining his figure. But the memories of those 700+ days, they belonged only to me now. The Benjamin who used to hand me orange candies. I would never see him again. Something warm settled on my shoulders. His coat. Didn't the doctor tell you? His voice was low, steady. I blinked, glancing down at the coat before looking up at him in confusion. What? Sore throat. You shouldn't be drinking. My heart skipped a beat, clutching the coat. I tried to sound casual. It's almost healed. He reached out, straightening the coat I had tugged crooked, the corners of his lips curving slightly. Is that so? Before I could respond, he said he'd take me home. I stood still for a moment, hesitating, thinking about the girl who had walked beside him earlier. I took off the coat and tried to hand it back. No need. People might misunderstand. Car horns sounded faintly from the distance. I saw his smile fade slightly as he listened. Then, without giving me a chance to refuse, he draped the coat over my shoulders again. His gaze darkened. You're Tom's teacher, and I'm his cousin. Given the situation, it's only right that I make sure you get home safely. Then, after a pause, his tone softened, but his eyes didn't. If you're worried about misunderstandings, don't. I don't have a girlfriend. The woman you saw, she's Tom's older sister. My cousin. He looked at me for a moment longer, then added quietly, almost with a hint of irony, and if you meant your boyfriend. He paused, his lips curving in a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Out drinking alone late at night. Ruby, what could possibly be more important than you? The night wind tangled my curls, brushing against my cheeks. I pulled away from his gaze, looking down, and muttered softly, I'm not drunk. Then, even softer, Anne. I don't have a boyfriend. Chapter 14. By the time the car reached the front of my apartment complex, the delayed rush of alcohol had me floating in a daze. Benjamin carried me inside. After setting me down, he went to the kitchen and returned with a cup of honey water. When he tried to feed it to me, I turned my head away, mumbling repeatedly, my head hurts. He tilted his head slightly, his tone low and coaxing as his hand steadied my jaw. Be good. Drink this, and it won't hurt anymore. I couldn't fight back. He half forced the cup to my lips. The warmth spread down my throat, but a strange wave of grievance welled up inside me. I pushed up to leave, dizzy and stubborn. As I turned, my arm knocked over a few books on the coffee table. They scattered onto the floor, along with a familiar blue envelope. My heartbeat slowed. The room went utterly silent. I froze, standing still, staring blankly at the floor. Benjamin crouched down and started picking up the books, one by one. Then his fingers brushed against the envelope, the one with Ruby written neatly across it. And that, I think, was the clearest moment of that entire night. I remember every detail vividly. He didn't react, didn't ask, didn't glance again. He simply picked it up, slipped it between the other books, and placed them all neatly back on the table. Of course, he was the ever-calm, brilliant Benjamin, steady as moonlight, untouchable as the wind. What was I expecting? What could I possibly expect? After that night, things went back to how they were. Every evening, the video calls resumed, separated by Tom. We maintained that delicate, safe distance, never too close, never too far, until one Friday night, after the evening self-study session, I was riding my small electric scooter home when a colleague called, asking me to stop by her place to pick up some documents. It was late, the streets nearly empty. I changed my route, and as I passed through a narrow alley, I saw several men dragging a young girl deeper inside. Her mouth was covered. Muffled cries escaped as she struggled desperately. She was wearing a school uniform from our high school. I didn't know her name. I didn't know who those men were. But one thought took over my mind. I'm a teacher. Protecting my students is my responsibility. That girl, so young, so full of life, her future couldn't end tonight. There wasn't time to go back for help. I forced myself to stay calm, quickly dialed the police and gave the address, then pressed my scooter's horn and sped toward them, stopping at the end of the alley. 4 men, all in their 30s, all drunk. In the dim light, 2 of them pinned the girl's arms and legs. Another yanked her hair back hard. Her uniform, the symbol of her innocence, lay torn beside them. She was stripped down to her undergarments, her cheeks red and swollen from slaps. The 4th man was undoing his belt. They froze when I burst in. I held up my phone with the camera on in my left hand, and gripped a long stick I'd picked up from the roadside in my right. Ignoring the pounding in my chest, I forced my voice to stay steady. I've already called the police. They'll be here any minute. If you don't want to get arrested, I suggest you stop now. For a moment, there was silence. Then 3 of the men straightened and began walking toward me, smirking. Police? You think they'll get here faster than we can strip you? One sneered. Hell, I'll do her right in front of you. Another laughed. The 3rd man's eyes glinted as he looked me up and down. Actually, you look even better than her. Maybe this just got more fun. He lunged forward. Out of pure instinct, I swung the stick at him. That was the first time I truly understood the brutal difference in strength between men and women. But even now, if I had to choose again, I'd still walk into that alley. Chapter 15. Benjamin arrived before the police did. He was wearing only a thin shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, the veins on his forearms faintly visible. He moved toward us, silent, focused, dangerous, like a predator who had finally found his prey. By then, I'd already hit my head in the struggle, and when I saw him, I thought for a moment I was hallucinating, until he looked at me and said softly, "Don't be afraid." And just like that, the tears came rushing out. Everything after that was chaos. I remember fighting to stay conscious, wrapping the girl's torn uniform jacket around her and pulling her tightly into my arms. "It's okay. It's okay," I whispered over and over. "Your teacher's here. You're safe now." Benjamin stood in front of us, shielding us with his body. He fought them, 4 grown men, with bare hands. In the confusion, I saw him twist one attacker's wrist, the same man who had slapped my face and torn at my clothes, and there was a sharp crack. The blonde man, realizing they were losing, grabbed a fruit knife and hurled it in my direction. Then the group bolted toward the far end of the alley. On instinct, I threw myself over the girl to protect her. A split second later, strong arms wrapped around me from behind, followed by a muffled grunt right beside my ear. The smell of blood filled the air. My eyes went wide in horror. My mouth opened, but no sound came out, only endless tears streaming down my cheeks. He didn't let me turn around, still holding me from behind. He whispered weakly into my ear, "Don't be afraid. It's over now." The sound of police sirens echoed distantly through the alley. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The doctor told me the girl had suffered only minor injuries, scratches, bruises, but Benjamin was still unconscious due to severe blood loss. 2 days later, using the video I'd recorded on my phone, the 4 men were arrested. Benjamin finally woke up. I took a few days off from school to look after him. When Tom came by, I was in the middle of peeling an apple for Benjamin. Just as I was finishing, a teasing voice came from behind me. "Wow, MS, Ruby, who's supposed to eat that? You've practically peeled away half the apple." I glanced down at the misshapen piece of fruit in my hand, uneven, lopsided, more peel than flesh, and had to admit my skills were lacking. But before I could reply, Benjamin, still reading a stack of documents, took the apple from my hand without a word and bit into it casually. Tom set a thermos down on the table with a grin. "Fine. Forget I said anything. Mom made bone broth. Don't forget to drink it." After Tom left, Benjamin closed the folder in his hands and turned his gaze toward me. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I bit my lip, my throat tight, the words scraped out in a hoarse whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I found out later that the reason he'd shown up that night was because I had accidentally called him. "I didn't mean to call you," I said softly, "but I'm so thankful you came. I'm really, really glad you did." The chill of early winter seeped through the window cracks. I got up to close it, my fingers brushing the cold frame, and behind me, Benjamin's voice came low and quiet. "You probably don't realize I'm even more thankful than you are." Chapter 16. Half a month later, Benjamin was finally discharged from the hospital. While I was busy running around handling the paperwork, I bumped into someone just outside the elevator. I opened my mouth to apologize, and froze. "Mason." He steadied me by the shoulders, then glanced at the documents and medicine bottles in my hands, frowning. "You're sick." I pulled away and took a step back. "No, I've got things to do. I'll get going." "Wait." He caught my wrist, his tone sharp and mocking. "Ruby, I show up here, and you're not even a little curious about me? Not one question?" I looked up at him, hospital gown, tired eyes, the same familiar face. "I don't want to know." After graduation, he had stayed in another city. When I came back, I didn't live with my parents either, so apart from holidays, we hardly saw each other. But a few days ago, my mom mentioned over the phone that Mason had been transferred back to our city, and that he'd drunk himself into the hospital at some dinner party. He coughed lightly, his voice hoarse. "It's been 3 years. Ruby, I've already given those 3 years back to you. Why can't you just believe me one more time? There's no such thing as a regret pill. Even if he waited for me another 30 years, I wouldn't turn back. Ruby. The sound of someone calling my name snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned around instinctively and saw Benjamin walking toward me. Slow but steady. Without thinking, I hurried to him and took his arm to support him. Looking up, I asked softly, "Why did you come out?" He smiled faintly, just about to answer when Mason spoke behind us. "Benjamin? Ruby, you too. We're heading home now," Benjamin said calmly, pulling his arm from my grasp and draping it over my shoulders instead. "Do you need something?" I didn't think much of it, I just assumed it was more comfortable for him to lean on me that way. But Mason's face drained of color in an instant. As for going home, since Benjamin's parents were abroad, I had to stay with him for a while after his discharge to help take care of him, which, technically, made sense. But after a while, I realized something strange. It felt more like he was taking care of me. In the kitchen, all I did was wash vegetables. For cleaning, I just pressed the button on the robot vacuum. Most of the time, I simply sat with him in the study, helping sort his documents or pouring him water. Meanwhile, Tom, after somehow jumping from a 15-point English score to nearly full marks, had returned home for the holidays. Before leaving, he'd grinned and waved. "Ms. Ruby, thank you for your hard work. I'm off now." I'd been gnawing on an apple, utterly speechless, my hair practically blown back by the absurdity. Turning to Benjamin, I asked, was that his way of thanking me for helping him go from 15 to 149? "Perhaps," he said lightly. The more I thought about it, the more I felt out of place. So one evening, during dinner, with the entire table full of dishes perfectly matching my taste, I finally gathered the courage to speak. "I feel like I'm not really doing anything here," I said cautiously. "I'm kind of useless. If you need help, maybe I should hire a caregiver instead." He was ladling soup into a bowl for me. At my words, his movements paused. He lowered his gaze for a long moment, then looked up again. The warm light of the dining room reflected softly off his gray loungewear, outlining his calm features with a quiet tenderness. "Useless?" he repeated softly, setting the ladle down. Then, in a low, steady voice, "What is it you think you should be doing?" I avoided his gaze, chewing on a rib and mumbling, "You don't really need me anymore. You seem pretty much recovered." He responded quietly, Bring me some fever medicine tomorrow. After that, you don't need to come again." My heart loosened, then clenched again. His tone was calm, detached. I didn't understand why he needed fever medicine, but I didn't ask, just nodded and left. The next day, when I knocked on his door with the medicine in hand, he opened it, pale, unsteady, clearly unwell. I froze for half a second before rushing forward to support him. His skin was burning hot under my palm, and panic instantly set in. I tried to drag him back toward the door. "You need to go to the hospital." He stopped me, his voice faint but firm. "No need, the medicine's enough." It was only then that I realized I was still holding the fever pills. I hurriedly helped him to bed, then ran to the kitchen for water. After I got him to take the medicine and fall asleep, the tight coil of nerves in my body finally began to unwind. I wandered into his study, looking for something to read to pass the time. The shelves were lined with trophies, medals, certificates, all perfectly arranged. Perfectly Benjamin. But one book stood out, a sea green picture book titled Daylight Fantasy. I frowned, surprised that someone like him would own something so whimsical. Curious, I opened it, and a photograph slipped out. In it was a girl wearing a yellow winter coat, pink hat, and matching gloves, standing in a snowy plaza, waiting. It was me. That was my first Valentine's Day with Mason. I had waited for him for hours in the snow, smiling like a fool, clutching my phone and shivering from the cold. I remembered that night, someone in a cartoon bear costume had appeared in the square, holding a giant bouquet of roses, handing one to every girl who was alone. Mason never came that night, but I did receive a rose. And now, turning the photo over, I saw 5 handwritten words scrawled neatly on the back. My daylight fantasy. The chill of the night seeped through the room as I stood at the door, the photo trembling slightly in my hand. I pushed open the bedroom door quietly. The faint light from the living room slipped through the crack, falling across his face. I walked closer, placed my hand gently on his forehead, still warm, then crouched beside the bed. Looking at him, after a long silence, I whispered softly, almost afraid of my own voice, "Benjamin, do you like me?" I started to stand, but suddenly his hand shot out, gripping my wrist tightly. In the next moment, I was pulled into his arms, even through the blanket. His skin was burning. His voice came from above me, low and hoarse, brushing against my ear. "Didn't you already know I liked you 7 years ago?" "The letter," he exhaled, his breath trembling against my skin. "Didn't you read it?" Chapter 17. The moment he pulled me into his arms, my mind went blank, thought completely evaporated. I even forgot to resist. All I could feel was the tightening grip around my waist as I tilted my head up instinctively to look at him. Then, a breath, hot and trembling, brushed against the curve of my ear, followed by a low murmur, "Ruby, I like you." My heartbeat thundered like a storm. My hands pressed weakly against his chest, clutching the edge of the blanket in confusion. In the next instant, the world seemed to spin. He shifted our positions, and I found myself beneath him, though there was still a layer of fabric between us. Our breathing tangled in the dark. I could only make out his blurred outline, the faint glow of his eyes. When I instinctively tried to retreat, his hand cradled the back of my head, leaving me no way to escape. His warmth descended, and just when I thought he would kiss me, he stopped, his breath brushing the side of my neck instead. The room fell utterly silent except for the rough rhythm of our breathing, until the weight on me suddenly disappeared. He rose and disappeared into the bathroom. As my thoughts slowly cleared, I realized maybe I finally understood how he'd gotten sick. Half an hour later, the bedroom light came on. Benjamin leaned against the doorframe, hair damp, water still dripping from the ends. His eyes were red, probably from the fever. His voice was low, gentle. "Sorry, when I'm sick, my self-control isn't great. Did I scare you?" Honestly, whether it was the 18-year-old Benjamin or the 25-year-old one, I'd always known him as calm and composed, a polite, distant kind of warmth. Except for that night in the alley, I'd never seen him lose control, but I couldn't deny it. I had been terrified. After a while, he set a cup of warm milk on the nightstand. "Get some rest," he murmured. "I won't come in again tonight." He turned to leave, but before he could, my fingers grasped the edge of his shirt. When I spoke, my voice came out hoarse, rasping from the strain. "That night, when you saw the letter, why didn't you react?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then a faint, bitter smile tugged at his lips. "What kind of reaction did you want from me? Your confession to him, wasn't that already your most complete rejection of me?" The words hit like a blade, sharp, quiet, precise. I let go of his shirt and whispered almost inaudibly, "I'm sorry." Under the bright light, his figure looked impossibly straight and clean, his back to me, his silence long. Then, suddenly, he turned around. He crouched beside the bed, eyes meeting mine, his tone soft, but trembling with something raw, cautious, almost pleading. "What about now? Now, can you finally look at me?" Chapter 18. I never imagined being confessed to under such circumstances, and never by Benjamin. But still, we ended up together. After that, I began to learn about all the things I'd never noticed before. The Christmas of my freshman year, I'd gone to the movies with Mason. Halfway through, he got a phone call and left me alone holding a bucket of popcorn. Benjamin was sitting right behind me the entire time. I never realized. The summer of my junior year, I was preparing for graduate school. It started pouring while I was on my way to an open lecture, so I hid in a milk tea shop. Someone handed me an umbrella. I thanked him, shoved my drink into his hands, and ran off so I wouldn't be late. That someone was Benjamin. In my second year of grad school, the night Mason came to find me, Benjamin was there too. But when he saw Mason, he thought I'd chosen to get back together with him. So he stood quietly in the distance, and I never saw him. Too many times, he passed through my world, while in my memories, there was no trace of him. Just like those 2 years I spent in that other timeline, they didn't exist in his memory either. I understood it clearly. The hidden knot in my heart had never truly untangled. The 25-year-old Benjamin didn't remember our 2 years together. So for a long time after we got together, I would catch myself staring at his face, lost in thought, as if trying to find the pieces of the boy I once knew. Sometimes, I even dreamed of him. In the dream, I was back in that other world, on the dark, echoing stairwell, and Benjamin was helping me down step by step, just like later, when he'd patiently explain math and physics problems to me over and over again, never losing his calm. Under the orange dusk, the boy in a clean school uniform, tall, lean, and quietly handsome, walked toward me, holding a stack of papers. I took 2 dazed steps forward, then suddenly ran to him. He smiled gently, lowering his head. "Ruby, I finished writing the explanations for your mistakes." I looked up at him, my nose stung, and before I could say anything, tears were falling. "It's okay if you get things wrong," he said, a little flustered. "If you don't understand something, come find me again. I'm always around. So, don't cry, okay?" He fumbled for tissues, found none, and just stood there awkwardly trying to comfort me. I wiped my face with my sleeve, nodded, took the papers, and gestured for him to head back. He lowered his eyes, not moving. Then, just as I looked up at him again, he quickly reached out and brushed away the tear I'd missed. His expression restrained. "Don't cry, I'm going." As I watched him walk away, something inside me ached. I reached out, but before my fingers could touch his sleeve, the dream ended. When I woke, the room was dark and still. Moonlight spilled through the window, and my face was damp. Of course, he noticed my growing distance. One night, after my shower, I was lying on the bed flipping through his photo album. It was full of pictures from childhood to high school. Then the light dimmed. The album was gently pulled from my hands. Benjamin stood over me, holding it, his gaze thoughtful. "You seem particularly interested in my high school years." I laughed awkwardly and pointed at the album. "I just wanted to see if I accidentally appeared in one of your photos." His hand landed lightly on my shoulder. He closed the album with one hand and set it aside, kneeling on the bed to pull me into his arms. "You're not in the album." I knew that. I'd already flipped through it a dozen times. Not a single photo of me. Maybe that part of our story would never exist in his memories, never see the light of day again. A sudden sting bloomed at my collarbone. Before I could react, he had pressed me down, his breath burning against my skin as it drifted from my chest to my ear. His voice was low, hoarse. "But you're in my heart." My hands trembled. I wriggled free from his hold and instead wrapped my arms around his neck, whispering softly against his ear, "Benjamin, did I ever tell you that once, in a time you'll never remember, I liked you too?" A pause, breath catching between us. "And even now, I still can't forget." Chapter 19. The first time I realized something was wrong was about 6 months after Benjamin and I got together. Out of nowhere, some blurry images began to appear in my mind. After they repeated a few times, I finally saw clearly. They were all scenes of Benjamin and me together, holding hands on a playground bathed in the golden glow of sunset, kissing on a snowy street, sharing the same stick of candied hawthorn on New Year's Eve in the park. A sudden, unbelievable thought struck me. I ran home, trembling as I opened that diary. When I saw what was written inside, tears fell one by one. Starting from my second year of high school, every word about Mason had turned into moments with Benjamin. "Is that you, Ruby from the future? I've read your diary. How lucky." I woke up to find the college entrance exam already over, and I even did pretty well. The unlucky part is, I'll have to make up for the classes I've never taken, so that the future Ruby won't suddenly become a big dummy when her memories start to change. So Mason never liked me after all. That's great. I don't plan to like him anymore either. I saw a love letter. It was written by Benjamin. "Benjamin took me to play darts today. He won me an ugly little white goose. Today Benjamin asked why I like drinking milk. I said it's because I want to grow taller. He laughed, messed up my hair, and said I'm so cute he doesn't know what to do with me. It's my birthday today. Benjamin gave me a handmade snow globe. It's more precious than any of the dolls Mason casually gave me before. Benjamin and I are together now." The last page of the diary ended with the single word I once left there, Benjamin. I began subtly probing Benjamin, asking if he had ever suddenly remembered something. Unfortunately, his answer was always no. Just when I was growing more and more disappointed, Benjamin proposed to me. It was during summer break. On an ordinary summer evening, we were walking hand in hand across the school track. He said he wanted to see the classroom where I used to stay, thinking it might help trigger his memories. I eagerly led him there, but the moment I pushed the door open, I was stunned by what I saw. At every desk stood a student, each holding a bouquet of roses. In the middle of them, Tom smiled at me and said, "Ms. Ruby, turn around, turn around." Even many years later, I can still remember that moment, the warm orange glow of the setting sun in the distance. And behind me, Benjamin kneeling on one knee in the dappled light, holding flowers and a ring. From our first year of high school until now, he had always been there, just to turn away. But honestly, that proposal scene, why did it feel so cheesy yet so romantic at the same time? A few days later, I went to the fruit shop to buy some apples. After constant practice, I could finally peel an apple in one perfect spiral. On my way back after paying, someone called out to me. It was Mason. He was wearing a black t-shirt, both hands tucked into his pockets. His hair was cropped short. Step by step, he walked up to me, looked down, and forced a faint smile. "My mom said, you're getting married. Congratulations." I replied politely, "Thank you." Just like when we were in school, we walked down the same street again, but this time, he didn't walk half a step ahead of me. The evening breeze was warm. After a brief silence, Mason gave a bitter laugh. "It's kind of funny. Lately I've been feeling like some of my memories are getting blurry. So blurry that it's as if we were never together at all." "Maybe." I sighed softly. That was the change Ruby made when she was 18. As we passed a self-service drink machine, he suddenly told me to wait a moment. He jogged over, bought a bottle of water, and handed it to me. Turning slightly to face him, I tilted my head up and smiled faintly. "Mason, don't you get it yet? I stopped drinking white peach soda a long time ago. And this is where we part ways. We're not walking the same road anymore." I turned and walked in another direction. At my feet stretched Mason's shadow, drawn long by the setting sun, and at the end of it stood Benjamin, waiting for me against the light. That night, Benjamin pulled me into his arms and spoke with exaggerated seriousness. "I think we should just go get our marriage certificate tomorrow." "Why? Hadn't both our families already picked an auspicious date after discussing it?" He buried his face in my chest, his voice muffled. "Otherwise, I just can't feel secure." I couldn't help laughing, sighing softly. "Shouldn't I be the one without security? You're so capable, and I'm just an ordinary high school teacher. Other than teaching, I don't know anything." "So what?" "Ruby, everyone has their own specialty." That line sounded familiar. My heart tightened slightly as I grabbed his pajama collar and blurted out, "Then what's my specialty?" "Specializing in me." We tangled until midnight, when exhaustion nearly knocked me out. He pinched my cheek to keep me awake, his hoarse voice brushing against my ear. "Ruby." I remembered something a few days ago. Dodging his face as he leaned in, I mumbled lazily, "What is it?" I remembered that long time ago, you used to call me Brother Gene. The moment I heard that, I sobered up instantly. My heartbeat quickened as I cupped his face, asking urgently, "Really? Are you sure?" He gave a low chuckle, pinched my chin, and said, "Not sure. Why don't you call me that again? Maybe I'll remember better." It had originally been a childish nickname, something I'd once said jokingly, but seeing his expression now, I bit my lip, unable to say it out loud. "Not willing? He brushed aside the damp hair sticking to my temple, his gaze growing dangerously soft. "No rush. The night is still long. Take your time to think about it." Chapter Extra, The Love Letter. To Ruby, student of Class 11, Senior Year. I like you. I like you very, very much. The first time I met you was on bus No. 137. You had two dark, curly braids and wore a pale yellow school uniform as you stepped on. At that moment, it felt like a comic character drawn by my aunt had just come to life. It wasn't until you awkwardly rummaged through your bag, unable to find your bus card, that I came back to my senses. I walked over, helped you scan my card, and handed you 2 coins so you could use them for the ride home. You gave me your warm milk in return, then quickly pulled out a ninth grade math workbook and started doing makeup homework right there on the seat. Sunlight spilled over you, making you look soft and fuzzy all over. I sat quietly in the seat behind you, watching you scribble away. When I saw your pen stop over a fill-in-the-blank question, I guessed you were thinking about what kind of answer would look reasonable. Glancing casually at the question, I gave you a number, but you didn't listen. Instead, you lifted your head and said, even if I'm making it up, I should at least make it look like a real answer. What you said sounds too random. I said nothing, just lowered my head and took a small sip of the milk. It was sweet. If you had listened to me back then, at least one of the answers on that page would have been correct. The next time I saw you was on the first day of high school, among the crowd around the ranking board. Almost instantly, I recognized the back of your head. The next second, you turned around with a bright smile, and my heart started racing wildly. For the first time in my life, I stuttered when speaking. Hi. I am Mason. I found your name. Oh, so you weren't looking at me. Following your gaze, I turned my head and saw a boy standing under the trees, holding a basketball. After that, I practiced my self-introduction in front of the mirror for a long time, hoping that next time I could say it smoothly. But, unfortunately, I never got to use it. For the next 3 years, I saw you countless times following that boy named Mason, and countless times we brushed past each other. Every time I took a detour past your classroom window, I'd see you laughing with your classmates. During assemblies, when you went on stage as the student representative, I'd see you below, standing there half asleep. I remember once after a joint exam, I went to the office to discuss a math problem with the teacher and saw you squeezed among the crowd, checking the ranking sheet. Then I heard your tiny groan of despair. Aw, my physics and math are a total disaster. Boo-hoo. I couldn't hold back a laugh. The math teacher asked what was funny, and I had to lie shamelessly. You just said something really amusing, sir. After that, every time exams were over, I'd secretly look at your answer sheets. Over those 3 years, I filled an entire notebook with detailed analyses, but never found a way to give it to you. No matter how I tried, it always felt abrupt, intrusive. Even, after all, every post-exam moment was your best excuse to go find Mason. But the thing is, his affection for you never came close to even a tenth of yours for him. I can't even remember when I started liking you. Maybe it was the moment I unconsciously began searching for you in every crowd that I realized something was off, but by then, it was already too late. So, Ruby, will you please turn around and look at me? I know all your favorite things. I won't walk so fast that you fall behind. I'll go watch every new movie with you, and I'll keep on liking you. Benjamin.